Hello, and welcome to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. I'm Tracy Whitney, your host for today's episode and the content manager of creatingafamily.org. We are talking today about tweens, teens, and how to manage the impacts of technology on their mental health. I'm joined by Brittany Anderson. She is an author, certified play and narrative intelligence practitioner, and the founder of Renala, which helps families become creative, vision-driven leaders beginning at home. Welcome, Brittany.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Tracy. Good to be with you.
I'm glad to have you. We just were talking before we went on recording about the perils of raising tweens and teens in this media and social media and technology saturated culture that we live in. So let's set the stage for our listeners to understand the concerns that most parents and caregivers have about their tweens and teens and their use of technology. When parents or caregivers come to you about their tweens or teens, what are the most common concerns that you hear from them?
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot of different things. I think a lot of it is also just questions about how we model technology in our home. And how we actually get our kids to even talk to us, which is also, very interesting to us because we're like, your kids don't talk to you. But I think that is a very common problem among parents and caregivers. Is it's hard to get their kids to open up and talk to them. And so, we model healthy screen use in our home, but we also model healthy relationships. And so our kids are 15, almost 15, almost 13. They actively communicate with us. We have regular rhythms of connection. And even our 15-year-old daughter not only talks to us, she still grabs and holds our hands in public, which we love. It's amazing. So, but, a lot of parents are saying, it's hard to get my kids to even talk to me, to open up to me. It's hard to pull them off screens if we need to have dinner or we need to get somewhere, even get to school. It's hard to get them to do other things like help around the house or help with chores, hard to get them to make their beds, right? I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily a challenge with just screens. It's always been a challenge of parenting. But yeah, and so we just, and then their ability to form relationships too, because they are so attached to the screens that their real life relationships are more difficult to develop at school or, on the sports field or in different activities. They might be a little bit more socially withdrawn as well. So we hear tons of concerns. I mean, we can barely scratch the surface of those today, but, a lot of parents are struggling with these things. There's no doubt about that.
Are you hearing a difference in the age levels, say, concerns that parents have for their 11, 12, 13-year-olds versus their older kids that are maybe 16, 17, heading off to adulthood into 18?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the levels of the concern are different, but I think the concerns themselves are different. I think parents are concerned, the levels are high, medium or high, depending on their circumstances. But I think the concerns are different. And so many of the younger kids, they may not be on social media yet, probably aren't if they're 10, 11, 12. I don't even think that the platforms allow them to be on social media at those ages anyway.
Yeah.
And so the concern is more about the content, I think, that they're falling into or stumbling upon. It's also the concern that they're not spending enough time in really imaginative play, or that the content or devices are replacing their building deeper friendships, being bored, those kind of things. I think for older kids, for the older teens, the concerns are more feel a little bit more serious in terms of bullying online, or, the way that their self-image is being developed if they're, watching the filtered influencer style content constantly, as well as other types of content they're consuming. There's so much horrible things out there that we can't even imagine that they might just come across or stumble upon. And, I think also I don't hear as much concern from parents about their older teens' relationships to play and things like that. But it is still something that parents should be concerned about, because kids, even older teens, still need to be playing, still need to be exploring, still need to be creating. It's so healthy for them. It's healthy for you as an adult too, as a reminder,
Right.
because even at in the teen years, they need to be playing, being bored, being creative. It's so important in those years as well. We emphasize a lot of importance of the play-based childhood in our work at Renala because research shows that how children play, particularly between the ages of 10 to 14, is a portal into how they're going to show up in relationship as adults. And so this also tends to be the ages we're putting screens in their hands. And so play is so super important in that age range of 10 to 14. It's also important before that, it's important after that, and it's important into adulthood. And so I hope parents will, even if they think that, oh, these other concerns about bullying and those things are valid concerns, but also being concerned about their kids' lack of play, even in those older teen years, they need to be continuing to play, whatever that looks like for them, so that they can have those healthy relationships as adults.
Yeah. And kind of one of the frontline tools for managing that is managing the screen time that our kids, how long are they on screens every day? And in today's culture, we can't manage how much time they're on screens at school for a variety of reasons. School is going to a screen-based learning model in many school districts across the country. But I'm curious if parents are looking for kind of a guideline or a starting off point or a jumping point, what's considered best practices right now for how much screen time is considered healthy or at least not harmful for tweens and teens specifically?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much conflicting advice out there, right? It's so hard to know what to do. I know I get frustrated about that as a parent, and I imagine all of your listeners do as well. I know there was research released by the CDC this past July, so it's pretty current, that found that 4 or more hours of daily screen time, and when I say 4 or more hours, I mean personal time. That's like scrolling social media, playing games, those kind of things. It's not education related time, because I know you mentioned school. They're on education related devices for most of the day now, but this is more personal time. 4 or more hours of that resulted in adverse health outcomes, particularly with their physical activity, their sleep, weight, mental health, and then the levels of support that they felt they perceived in their family and their relationships as well. And that study looked at children who are ages 12 to 17. And so clearly, to me, 4 hours seems like too much for my kids. Like whoa, that's a lot, especially after they're, at school all day. I want to spend time with them. And so 4 hours seems too much for me. And certainly, I think it's definitely context dependent, and it's dependent on the child too. So I don't think there's blanket advice about what's good, what's not good, what's too much, what's too little, all of those things. It's really context dependent, it's child dependent, it's family dependent. And so you really have to make that decision for yourself. How much do I want my children on these devices, and what is that replacing in terms of their ability to play, their ability to connect with your family, their ability to connect with friends? Parents have to make that decision and notice, when is too much, too much. And I think it is quality over quantity as well. Our son loves to play Minecraft, but he never plays it alone. He's always playing it with friends. He has some best friends in Tennessee. He has friends in Kentucky. And so he's always, talking to them, and they're playing in their realm, I think it's called, together. And so, he's never doing that alone. So I'm okay with him playing that for a couple hours every day, because it's time that he's connecting with friends he wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with. In fact, even this morning, he came down. I heard him upstairs playing with a friend in Nashville. He hasn't played with him in a little while. And I heard him say, "Oh, I have to go down and make my lunch for school." And he came down and started putting his salad together. And I said, "You know what? Go back up and play with Jude, because you haven't talked to him in a while." And so I said, "I'll make your lunch for you." And he, so sometimes it's, pushing them back and saying, this is a healthy use of your time right now because you're connecting with a friend. And so it's all context dependent and child dependent, I think, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. When you said 4 hours is when it starts
Yeah.
to get adverse effects, I was shocked. That seems so much
I
time.
agree. I agree.
Although I'll be the first to admit, when you're engaged in something with that level of intensive purpose and focus, 4 hours can fly. I mean, I get
It
that
can.
on a kid's behalf.
For sure.
But what I hear you saying, kind of as a summary of that, is that the amount of time is probably not as important as the way that time is spent. So if it's in a valuable pursuit, like connecting with friends, or learning a new skill on YouTube or something like that, that's more beneficial than it is harmful, as long as it's not out of balance with all the other things that are important to a healthy, thriving childhood.
For sure.
I am curious about the research. Did they mention, or was there anything that indicated what time of day might be most harmful for teenagers or tweens?
Yeah, I don't think that research touched on that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look at it. But obviously, late at night is definitely more problematic. And just a reminder for listeners, that's as true for adults as it is for kids.
That's true.
And particularly teens need between 8 to 10 quality hours of sleep per night. And take tech out of the equation. I don't think most teens are even getting close to that amount of sleep. I know my daughter gets up at 5:30 every morning. She had softball practice. We didn't get home till 10 last night. So, take the screens out of the equation. They're already not getting enough sleep. And then when you add screens in, it's even more problematic. And so they're having a harder time falling asleep. They're struggling to turn their brain off. They might have notifications overnight that can disrupt their sleep. Most of that's common sense. We kind of know we probably shouldn't be looking at this bright light right before we need to go to bed, right? But so many parents, caregivers struggle with putting boundaries around that. And I think it's, again, not just kids who struggle with it, but parents. And so we kind of have to model that for them if we're to expect healthy behaviors around the nighttime hours, to model that for them. I'm happy to see more schools kind of going phone free. And so because I think, those times of day or other times that the screens aren't healthy or helpful. Our high school our daughter just started high school, and they are phone free, but not at lunchtime, which for me is a little bit frustrating. And I'm going to be vocal about that. But because the lunchroom is quiet, the kids are on their phones instead of talking to each other. And I don't think that's healthy either. And so, I think there's good times, there's not good times. Clearly the right before bed is not good. And then other times of day, it's definitely context specific.
Yeah. And I would put a plug in for the understanding that when our kids are at the end of the day and they're tired, it's not just a priority of helping them get good sleep. It's the priority of helping them understand when you are tired, you don't make wise choices.
Yeah.
And helping them understand. And again, I'm guessing most of the parents and caregivers who tuned in today did not expect to have their habits examined as well. But it's a very good reminder that if we don't want our kids scrolling late at night, we shouldn't be scrolling late at night, because tweens and teens often stay up as late as we do. In my house, sometimes my teen stays up later than I do. And if I'm sitting there scrolling, and that's all she sees is the top of my head and me scrolling, I'm not modeling a great habit for her.
Yeah.
What kinds of online content are you seeing to be most worrisome for the tweens and teens in our homes? Maybe some examples of maybe the more subtle content that is maybe more worrisome than we're even aware.
Yeah, it was interesting. I saw a post on Instagram, I think the other day, that said, "What age should I get my kid my son a phone?" And it said, "Well, at what age do you want him to see pornography?" And so I was like, "Wow, that's powerful."
Yep.
And so obviously that's a huge concern. We don't know if that's being shown to our children. I think that's obviously a serious concern and very harmful. I think some of the more subtle things can be things that, like I said earlier, the influencer style content that can cause kids to struggle with body image, with self-worth. I have a lot of concerns with the AI generated content that, kids might see online, and that it may be authentic, it may not, it may be teaching them things that aren't true. There's also content that's, pushing suicide, self-harm, violence, all of these things that are just awful to even comprehend. Like, how are people living with themselves pushing this kind of thing on our kids? And so I don't think any of that is necessarily unknown to this audience. I mean, I think all of us have these concerns. We're seeing them, and we worry about our kids seeing them. And, it's hard to get into the dangers of each specific platform. So parents really need to be proactive about, what platforms is my child on? What are the dangers of those specific platforms? What do I need to be watching out for? What do I need to be monitoring? And how do I need to be having conversations and engaging my kids in what's acceptable and what's not acceptable online?
Yeah, that's a great point. The hypervigilance required to parent children in this culture is exhausting for parents. It's a hard consuming task. But we want to make sure parents feel equipped and feel empowered to take this role in their children's lives. And specifically around the issues of mental health, we know that risk for suicide, risk-taking behavior, and things like that can be influenced by what they're taking in on screens. So what are some of the, maybe specific mental health impacts that we should be looking for when we have children who are on tech so frequently and so long, 4 hours, up to 4 hours a day or more for some kids? What are the mental health effects that you're seeing?
Yeah, obviously there's clearly anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, self-harm. There's also, going back to the sleep conversation, there's disrupted sleep patterns that can affect their mental health and their ability to focus as well. Then there's, addictive types of behaviors where it might be hard to pull children off of the devices and into the real world. I also think, that at Renala, we believe that relational health is the foundation for better physical, mental, and emotional health. And so when you think about the relationship implications of having a kid attached to a screen for hours and not to a physical people, kids that aren't connecting with friends at the level that they once did, that's a concern also for their physical health, for their mental health, and their emotional health as well. And I worry about what that means for the future, because as we shared earlier, if they're not playing, they're not learning how to be in relationship with others. And so what does that mean for their future, and as growing into an adult and not knowing how to relate to others and be in relationship and have healthy, mental, physical, emotional health.
Right.
Because these are the kids who are going to be taking care of us. They're going to be running our government, running our organizations, taking care of the planet. We need them healthy relationally, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so all of these things are super important conversations to be having now and thinking about the future.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Parenting isn't about raising the kid in front of you. It's about raising the kid in front of you to become a great adult. And
yes,
that's the goal is we're preparing future adults. So I appreciate that point. I wonder, are the impacts between, say, social media, gaming, and media streaming, are those impacts different?
Yeah, I mean, all of them can have a lot of the negative impacts that we've already talked about. They can also have positive impacts. We talked a little bit about some of the gaming and how kids can do it together, and it's positive. So there's a lot of studies out that show that screen time itself is not necessarily bad. And going back to that quality conversation, especially if they're enjoying the screen time with other people, that can be a healthy activity in moderation. I think certainly screen time gets a bad rap. And when we're looking at, whether there's differences in social media, gaming, video streaming, I think social media can have some positive impacts because they're connecting with
Mm-hmm.
others. But
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that it can be more negative than it is positive, especially if they're kind of doom scrolling or those kind of things. But again, I think screen time often gets a bad rap, and rightfully so. But there are other things that can be seemingly harmless that can be just as impactful on our kids' ability to grow in relationships, to be creative, to be
Mm-hmm.
innovative, and to
Mm-hmm.
be bored. Parents are overloading often, responding to the screen time by overloading their kids' schedules with other activities and extracurriculars that content is still being fed to them, whether it's getting it on a screen or getting it in a class or in another format. And it's still preventing them from being bored, from being innovative, from being creative, for just creating something out of nothing. And, for us, our daughter is almost 15. She loves to read. I mean, she reads 2, maybe more 500 plus page books a week. I mean, it's crazy. And most people will say, wow, that's incredible. But at the same time, it's a bit of an addiction for her. Mm-hmm. So we have to be mindful of how much how much she's reading and how many hours she's spending reading, and pull her out and remind her, okay, go draw for a bit because you love to draw, or go, have some time with friends, go have time with us. Yeah. Let's play a game, those kind of things. And so, all of these different modalities can be positive, but they can also be harmful. So it's all about noticing and having a healthy relationship to whatever our kids are finding themselves getting lost in.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And we do know that the risk for addictive behaviors around screen time and social media are higher than the risk for addiction to a book. I think my parents would agree that I was probably addicted to books when I was a child. So the risk for addictive behaviors or responses to social media or online time are higher, but you're right that seeking that balance, seeking ways to support our children to be more balanced in their approach to all the things that they enjoy is a good recipe for supporting and scaffolding good mental health. Do you feel like there's maybe a difference between the impacts for boys versus impacts for girls, positive or negative? But is there a difference down the gender lines?
Yeah, the research I'm familiar with shows that there is a more adverse effect on girls generally, clearly for the obvious things like poor body image, poor self-image, comparison, and then the mental health effects of depression, anxiety, and those kind of things. But certainly boys can experience it too. And so I don't want to minimize the fact that just because the research skews one way that boys don't experience it. Again, it's very context specific, and every child is different. Every family is different. And so it's really about paying attention to both genders, both girls and boys, and knowing, and noticing what seems like a healthy use for them, and noticing where it may actually be impacting negatively their mental health, their emotional health, their relational health. And so it's really up to parents and caregivers to be mindful of both girls and boys and what level seems healthy for each of them at every age and stage too.
I'm sorry to interrupt this conversation. I'm learning a ton and appreciating so much of what Brittany is sharing. And I'm wondering if you are looking for a community of other parents and caregivers who get the same struggles and issues that you're facing while you're raising your family, I'd like to recommend our Facebook group to you. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/creating-a-family. And in that group, you'll experience a safe place to land and connect with other parents and caregivers who are trying to manage tech use and trying to manage identity development and exposure to culture and exposure to birth family, extended family, all those things that parents and caregivers have to juggle with their kids. So if you're interested in learning and connecting with other families, come on over to the Facebook group. Again, it's facebook.com/groups/creating-a-family. And speaking of learning together, if you have a friend who could use the practical advice that Brittany is sharing with us today, please recommend the podcast and let them know that we would love for them to take a listen and learn right alongside of us. Sharing the podcast helps us get this kind of information and other great equipping information into the hands and the ears of new listeners. So we appreciate your help that way. Let's go back to the show. So let's drill down a little bit onto the issues surrounding the specific audiences that creating a family supports. That would be the adoptive and foster parents, relative or kinship caregivers who are raising tweens and teens. Why would a child with a history of impact from adoption or foster care or relative caregiving, why would they be maybe more at risk or more vulnerable to some of those tech-related mental health challenges that we've been discussing thus far?
Sure. Yeah. And, I, want to share up front that there's so much that I don't know on, I don't want to claim to be the expert on all of those things. And so, but, my knowledge shows that kids with trauma and loss, prenatal exposure to, alcohol or drugs, or, those who have neurodiverse needs, they do tend to be more vulnerable to the risks of online media. And so, all of the issues that we've previously discussed up to this point can certainly become even more heightened for these children. And so they might be searching more deeply than another child. They might be searching more deeply for connection and belonging, and that makes them a bit more susceptible to the dangers of technology. And so, I'm thinking about the algorithms. They can exploit some of those things like impulse control and emotional regulation. Right. They can make it easier to have the compulsive use or screen addiction. They can also, things like online triggers like cyberbullying or suicidal content or self-harm content or violent content, those kind of things can actually hit harder because they're hyper aroused in those kind of things. For neurodiverse kids, I know that the kind of those dopamine rewards can feel soothing in the moment, but also lead to, dependency or kind of heightened withdrawal as well.
Yeah. And I think too, sometimes when our kids are feeling internal discomfort from a loss or from trauma or from that prenatal exposure impact of brain development and delayed development and things like that, sometimes they're seeking a self-medicating type of environment. And it goes back to that dopamine hit. This feels good. This feels safe. This feels comfortable. I don't have to interact with somebody that's not predictable. This is predictable. And so I'm going to keep turning to this. And being very aware of that risk for our specific demographic of kids it's a good way to put it. How do issues like a child's developing identity or their attachment or history of attachment or their ability to be resilient, how do those things interact with or intersect with the way they use their devices or the time that they spend on their devices or the kind of content that they're seeking on their devices? Yeah,
and I love that you asked this question because, all kids, and I think even adults, crave connection. They crave belonging. They crave a sense of identity and purpose. And all of us can find it in many ways, really anywhere, but it's a lot easier to find it online because it's at our fingertips, right? We can find it in social or online media. We can find it in what we do, what we achieve, and what we have, the things that we think make us valuable. And we seek out, validation that isn't just online, but online is certainly exacerbating the problem and distracting, I think, kids and parents from healthy identity formation. And so parents and caregivers have to make a decision. Do you want your child's identity to be developed by online media, by external things like something they do or their work or their achievement or by what they have or what they lack? Or do you want it shaped by who they truly are?
Yeah.
And I think it's up to parents, up to caregivers to do that work, because healthy identity formation begins in the family.
Right.
And so at Renala, we have something called the Be Do Have Blueprint that really outlines 9 key areas that help families connect, align, and solve problems. And in that B sphere, which is the foundation, is understanding your identity, your strengths, your needs. And we really help each member of the family understand each other on this individual level so that they can build those stronger support systems, have a strong identity, and that makes them more resilient to those online messages that might tell them false narratives about who they are,
Right.
because they have that anchor of knowing inside the family, inside their relationships, who they are, and that makes them more resilient to those messages.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, do you want to be the ones helping your child form that identity, or do you want to let culture help your child form their identity? And not to say either one is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, not to say that one or the other is perfect in the way that it's achieved. But when we're, as parents and caregivers, taking the lead, taking the reins of that, and intentionally finding ways to be the ones that are helping our kids form that identity and understand who they are and who they come from, and the context of that. I love the word that you used, anchor. Our homes should be their anchor. And I love that you phrased it in that way. But that question, it goes through my mind a lot. Do I want to be the one forming who my kid is, or do I want to let culture do it? And I err on the side of I'd rather be the one doing it, but it's a valid question for parents and caregivers to ask themselves.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, what are some kind of proactive steps that adoptive and foster parents or kinship caregivers, grandparents raising grandkids, can take to proactively reduce some of the risks before the problems become a crisis, before you have to say to your kid, I need you to just get off your phone for a week and detox? What are some of those proactive things that we can do to reduce those risks and issues for our kids?
Yeah, I mean, I first want to acknowledge that I imagine this is a huge challenge, because often a lot of these caregivers are inheriting issues that they weren't responsible for being proactive about in the first place. And so, and then given the heightened challenges that often a lot of these kids are at higher risk because of their histories, like that's just acknowledging all of that. It's also hard to give, blanket advice, because every child and caregiver is different. But I think one thing I would say that I think could apply powerfully to anyone listening and any child is, understanding what they love to do that is screen free, what lights them up, have conversations about it, if they will open up to you. Because, I know these kids have probably heard no, either directly or indirectly, their entire lives. And so saying yes to something that they love, even their outlandish requests, maybe they want to cook something and make a mess, like say yes to that activity, do those activities with them. The practice of saying yes to them is powerful, and it helps them learn healthy behaviors, mindsets, and it models healthy relationships. That way it becomes less about saying no to the devices and more about saying yes to the other things that light them up, to connection, to play. That's so important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Starting that foundational, I'm going to help you find what lights you up, and then I'm going to provide as many opportunities as I can to see you keep lighting up. But the reality is that we still have to have some boundaries and some monitoring. What are some ways that we can implement boundaries, monitoring, even that co-viewing or co-playing as preventative methods?
Yeah, I mean, the co-viewing, co-playing is super important. Get involved with the things that they're enjoying online, because they're having some fun on there too, and it's good, and it's good to take interest in play alongside of them, because they usually will invite you in, I find.
especially if they get to teach you about it.
Yes.
So if you ask them,
Absolutely.
hey, that game looks pretty fun, how do you play? Yeah, I actually had that experience the other day with one of my kids. Like, I've never played this game before. I don't actually like online games, but she loves it. Teach me what you've learned about this game.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's beautiful. Our son will go on for hours about Minecraft, and I am more educated on it than I probably should be as a 40-plus-year-old woman. But yeah, I absolutely, ask them questions, talk to them, play with them. I think those are all really healthy things to do, and helps them create a healthy relationship with it. I think I believe in creating generally vision over boundaries. Again, it goes back to that yes and no mindset. When you create a vision together, and that's parents with or caregivers with your kids, those boundaries naturally happen. So it's kind of thinking more about, what is the family we're creating? What is the vision that we're creating? How are we different from other families? How do we want to approach tech and relationships and impact and all of those things different? Or what do we value as a family? And how does the tech fit into that? And so, that's something we help families do, because, we really believe in vision, and that boundaries are naturally the outpouring of vision. They make those boundaries more clear. And so that said, monitoring is still important, and not enough parents are doing it. Yeah. There's Jonathan Haidt's book, that The Anxious Generation, that talks about that, and how we're super proactive in keeping our kids safe in the real world, and reactive or kind of too relaxed and yeah, keeping them safe online.
Right.
And there's certainly apps that can help keep them safe, but it's not foolproof. And so, we need to be continually having conversations with our kids as parents, as caregivers, to make sure that they are, setting appropriate goals for themselves in their personal lives, so that they can kind of develop that healthy relationship technology naturally. Our son, he's trying to get better at basketball. And so, he got up early this morning, he did a workout, he'll come home, he's going to play basketball probably for an hour, practicing out back. And so when, he has those goals, it makes it easier for him to set those boundaries versus us having to set them for him. So help your kids set those goals, and help them, step into vision versus just, be more known for what you're for than what you're against.
Yeah.
What are we creating versus what are we restricting?
And this is especially important if you are welcoming a foster child or a relative child into your home that may have had differing expectations or differing goals or differing boundaries before they came to your home. It's really important that you tread lightly at first. It's important that you give them a voice and a choice. You said something at the beginning of this segment where you're collaborating together on boundaries and monitoring and things like that. And when you're welcoming an older child that's had a whole lot of life experience before coming to your home, whether it's by adoption or foster care or raising a relative's child, treading lightly and making it a collaborative effort will, first of all, help that child feel seen and heard and respected for the body of life that they bring to the table. But it also will almost guarantee better buy-in, even when you have to set a boundary that they don't love. And if they feel invested in the process, if they feel that they own part of the process, you're communicating that you value them and helping them take that sense of value to another place where maybe they won't feel valued, and they can recognize that I'm not valued here. My voice doesn't matter here. And so I don't need to keep spending my time here. And there are places in the tech world where they will get that message that they're not valued and that they're not treasured and precious. And if they can develop that understanding of how that feels, because they've had the understanding of being valued in your home, you will get much better agreement and buy-in to whatever boundaries you do have to put in place.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, that collaboration is so important.
And that kind of goes to our next question about self-protection and self-regulation. When we are raising tweens and teens who need the life skill of prioritizing their own mental health and prioritizing their own value, what are some of the specific things that we can do to kind of help them develop that or develop that awareness? How do we talk to them about those things that we were just talking about, their value, their preciousness?
Yeah, I mean, it goes a lot back to that identity conversations we were having earlier. I think that helps them become resilient in knowing who they are before they go out and social media or culture tells them. A couple of the questions that, when we work with families on identity, we talk to them about, what do you think the moment you took your first breath, before you had anything? What do you think was created for the world? And sometimes different words, different themes will emerge. And that becomes, again, that anchor that really helps the child just see themselves through a very positive light about what's right about them, that they were born for a purpose, and seeing themselves positively, and they can carry that into the world. And for our family, each of us has a word that, having gone through that exercise together, is an anchor for us. Mine is gift, my husband's is joy, our daughter's is imagination, and our son's is friend. And so that's something that, we constantly have conversations about as a family, is how are we living out that identity? How are we not living out that identity? And how are we going to shift? And how can we shift in areas that we might not be showing up in that way? Because when we show up that way, it's a completely different interaction with others, with media, with the messages that we're being fed. And so, really having that anchor of identity, it helps make that resilience possible. Understanding your strengths, understanding what is unique about your kids' strengths. We do a lot of work with Clifton Strengths. That's an assessment that gives you a spectrum of 34 strengths. A lot of people don't know that there's actually an assessment for kids as well. And so we do a lot of strengths work with families, helping them understand one another's strengths and anchor into those strengths as well. Because your strengths are actually the likelihood you share your top 5 in the same order as someone else's 1 in 33 million. So you are different, your kids are different, your spouse, your partner is different, and understanding that about each other is powerful. And then understanding that about yourself when you are, responding to all of the messages that are being thrown at us every day, understanding this is who I am, this is my identity, my strengths, my needs, and understanding that can be very powerful in being resilient in the online world and the real world as well.
Yeah. So when we're teaching our kids and calling out their strengths and naming them and using them in regular everyday conversation and building up all the other parts of their life, academically, socially, family relationships, and we're calling out all of those strengths, we're building their ability to identify when they've been harmed online or when they've participated in something online that is maybe harmful to others. And that digital resilience, or that ability to recover from something that happened online that was harmful, is just as vital as the resilience that our kids need when they get a bad grade at school and they need to recover from that, or when they've had a fallout with a friend and they need to recover from that.
Absolutely.
So when we're trying to navigate that, the building their identity and calling out their strengths in all the other areas of their life so that they're also able to do it online, how do we balance needing to supervise what they're doing online? Because let's face it, kids, especially vulnerable kids, will be seeking out and participating in unhealthy things online. That's just the nature of the learning curve of a kid. So how do we balance supervision and giving them the autonomy and trust that they need to learn how to be resilient online and in real life?
Yeah, I mean, those regular conversations, the regular touch points about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable online are so important. It's not a one and done. be constantly having them. I think even daily, at least at the minimum weekly, having some type of conversation about maybe, keeping it even up with news media and seeing what some trends are and just opening up conversations about, well, this article said this about this platform, and I know you're on that. I just want to have a conversation about that. I'm amazed at the level at which our kids come to us with even the most mundane little things, because we've taught them to be hypervigilant online, but at the same time, in real life, we give them a lot of autonomy. And I know that that's not always simple for a lot of your listeners, because, they have new kids in their home. That's not always simple to just say, okay, you can just go play in the neighborhood by yourself or that kind of thing. And so I know this isn't a solution for everyone immediately, or maybe not at all, but, giving them some level of autonomy in their real life experiences. So, our kids are biking to school. They're playing in the neighborhood with kids. We trust that our son loves to cook. We trust him to cook on the gas stove. They're building independence in their real lives. And so our ability to trust them in the real world situations makes them trust us when it comes to online behaviors, that they feel comfortable coming to us to share what's going on, what doesn't feel right. And so I would recommend the same for your listeners. Be intentional as you can about ways that you can build their independence in real world scenarios, so that will spill over into the way that they conduct themselves online and know what's right, what isn't, and be open and honest with you when things don't feel right.
And this is why it's so important that we know our kids, that we know their age and stage, that we know their abilities, that we know their interests. So even if their abilities don't match their interests, we can help them get there. But the reality is that sometimes our kids do get harmed online, whether it's exposure to something that is well beyond their depth of understanding, or something outright immoral or improper or too graphic, whatever. What steps do we take as parents to help? And again, focusing on tweens and teens and mental health, what steps can we, parents and caregivers, take to get the conversation going about the harm that they experienced? And when should that conversation turn to the hands of a professional?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends largely on the context. And I think if it's an emergency, clearly it's an emergency. But there may be some times where it's a conversation that needs to be had to start. And I think it's important for parents to remember that your emotions are probably going to feel out of control when you first hear of something happening. And so it's important for you to self-regulate, to pause, regulate your emotions, because you are going to have them. This is your child that you love. And so then opening up a conversation with them without shaming them, ask them questions about what happened, how they're feeling, assessing the risks together, like what risks did this cause? Obviously the situation may need to be escalated. If it's law enforcement, maybe if it's a cyberbullying, it needs to be taken up with another parent or a school administrator, those kind of things. But yeah, and I realize that those are harmful situations, but they also open up conversation that may, open up healthier behaviors going forward too. And so not seeing them, depending on what it is, like, obviously, again, this is context specific, but it may open up a conversation that needed to be had that can really change things moving forward. And, parents and caregivers need to set that vision around acceptable use of tech, remove the harmful tech, block certain individuals, whatever that is. And there's a lot of resources online that can help with specific situations, because we can barely scratch the surface of them on this podcast. But, there's, I think Common Sense Media has some good resources, American Academy of Pediatrics. And I think it's the Center for Humane Technology has some good resources as well that are more specific to context. But I think the final reminder is really just to remind kids that, again, going back to that identity, going back to their strengths, that a harmful experience doesn't define them.
Right. Right. That's so good. And I think too, it's important that we recognize that, well, a couple of things. First, that we recognize that the interaction may not have been intentional. It could have been completely accidental. And so until we know differently, we should assume the best about our kids. The second thing that's really important, you alluded to it at the beginning, was taking a beat. Just pause, breathe, get your own emotions and fears and worries under control. Try not to react bigger than they're reacting, but also be aware of and educate yourself about the symptoms of that kind of harm or symptoms of mental health struggles. So, symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, that could include self-isolation, changes in eating or sleeping patterns, changes in grades, changes in friend circles, any of those significant shifts that you're noticing in your child, tween or teen. Pay attention to those and start the conversations, and recognize that sometimes bringing in a mental health professional sooner than later may get a lot of pushback from your teenager, but it in the long run may be the very best thing that you can do. And seeking help sooner than later for kids that are at risk or vulnerable, you can't go wrong with seeking the help sooner than later.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One more interruption, if you don't mind. I wanted to remind you about our library of free courses. Thanks to our partners at Jockey Being Family Foundation, we can offer you 15 free courses where you get to learn alongside of experts that are sharing fantastic information about how to talk to our kids, or how to avoid being triggered by our kids, or how to navigate school issues with children who come from families impacted by adoption, foster care, kinship care, relative caregiving. There's 15 courses. You can take one or all 15. And if you go to bit.ly/JBF support, that's bit.ly/JBF support, you'll be able to see the full array of 15 courses. And if you keep your eye out, you'll see that we rotate in new courses occasionally and freshen up the library. So we hope that you'll take advantage of those. Now let's go back to the interview. Thanks so much. So let's kind of focus a little bit more positively on the issues of tech and teens and tweens and mental health. And let's talk about what a healthy tech culture might look like in a home that's got multiple tweens and teens.
Yeah, absolutely. I referenced Jonathan Haidt earlier, and, he recommends no phones till high school. I know for some listeners that your kids are not in high school yet, but they already have a phone. I understand that because I know that book that he released only came out, I think it was like last year, maybe the year before.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is kind of new developments. Some of us have already gotten our kids phones. I know that's the case for us. Our kids, because they have so much independence, our son has a phone. He's almost 13, and our daughter has one. She's 15. But, we don't allow social media for either of them because we want them to make that decision themselves when they're adults. I don't feel like they are equipped to make that decision about what they post online and how that's going to impact them later in life. And so if they want to be on social media when they're adults, they can make that decision. And so not every parent they might not see it that way. They might see it differently. And so I think if, monitoring their phone use diligently and their tech use diligently is very important, and having those conversations regularly. And I want to, go back to what we shared at the beginning when we were talking about sleep is, as parents, we are modeling for our kids what a healthy tech culture looks like.
Right.
And so if we're scrolling for hours a day, if we are on them at the dinner table or, in other times when we could be connecting with them, then we're not modeling good behaviors for them. And so if you want to create a healthy tech culture in your home, you have to model that yourself. first. And so again, if you're on your screen before bed, how are they expected to not do that?
Yeah. Yep.
The change you wish to see in your family, the culture that you wish to shift and change, it always begins with you as the parent or the caregiver. You can't see change if you do not fully embody that change first. And so if you're looking to create that tech culture, I would start with yourself.
Right.
Make a list of, okay, what are all of the things that I want to change in my family? And before you make the request or have the conversation, take a week and just make those changes yourself first.
Right.
And then have the conversation. So if you don't want phones at the dinner table, then start putting your phone away at the dinner table. Try it for a week and then talk about it. If you don't want them before bed, try that for a week for yourself first and then make that request of your family. And so again, we have to model that for them or they're not going to take it seriously. And I know there's arguments to be made. Well, we're more mature than they are and can handle things. But, a lot of these behaviors aren't necessarily good for us as adults either. And so, modeling that for them is as good for us as it is for them. It's good for creating that healthy family culture that is going to secure a better future for your family and for your kids.
So true. And I'm laughing because I'm pretty sure that the parents and caregivers who tuned in today really did not necessarily expect to be reminded that more is caught than taught. And so it's good reminders. It's good, refreshing information for myself and for all of us who are listening to, if you want to create and help form a healthy, well-balanced, productive adult, then you need to be a healthy, well-balanced, productive adult. And that's a tough one to swallow. But let's wrap up on a positive note of one very equipping or empowering piece of advice that you would offer our listeners, how to lead their homes around the idea of technology and screens and tweens and teens, how to lead with purpose and attend to those issues of mental health.
Yeah, sure. So I want to remind parents and caregivers, you are the most powerful people in the world. So our Renala is named after the magnificent baobab trees in Africa because we ask families, what if your family tree became less about the past and more about the future? And I know we've talked a lot about, creating that future for our kids and as a parent, you have the power to change that future for your family. As a caregiver, you have the power to change that future for these kids. And so what do you want that future family tree to look like? I don't think we think about our family trees in that way a lot, right? We think about them in the context of the past, but there's going to be a family tree in the future. So how do you want to shape that? You have so much power. You have a superpower to shape these kids. And as you think about that future, how does tech use in your family fit or not fit into that vision? Because even the simplest decisions that you think are harmless today, they have implications for that future. Our kids have only 6,500 or so days in our home. And that's, and I know for the audience listening today, there's varying degrees of how many days they're with you. And most of us have probably burned through some, many, maybe all of those days at this point. And so just be mindful of what is the future that I'm creating and the little seemingly senseless decisions that don't feel like they're insignificant is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Insignificant decisions that don't feel like they have impact in that future. They do. The choices you're making today. One thing I would love to equip your audience with is, we do one thing as a family each year. It's called Yes Week. And it's going back to the yeses that I've kind of alluded to throughout our conversation. And it's 1 week each year where we commit to screen-free play. And we say yes to all of the things that are playful for us. And so just a reminder, this is not about saying yes to your kids, because I know there's that movie Yes Day that is like saying yes to all of these outlandish things. This is about saying yes as a family. So it's about them saying yes to you too, and figuring out what is playful for each of you and spending the week saying yes to that. And so for us, it also happens to be the week we work on our vision, our purpose, our values as a family as well. And it doesn't have to be a full week. I know a week can be a little overwhelming. We celebrate it the first week our kids are out of school each summer, but it doesn't have to be at the beginning of summer. It can be now, it can be a day, it can be a weekend. But just practice, what it looks like to say yes to things that are off screens and just see how that feels. I think you'll find your kids get really excited about that possibility because you're setting an intention of a whole day or a whole weekend or even a whole week of, saying yes to things that are non-tech specific and connecting as a family and see what happens as a result of that. After you come out of that, debrief it, talk about, okay, what do we want to carry forward into our daily lives now that we've done this process together?
Yeah. I love that. That's a great idea for kind of instilling the vision setting skills that they need as adults, especially with our tweens and teens. We want them to go into adulthood with as many tools to thrive as possible. And saying yes to off-screen things as a family can, whether it's a day or 3 days or a week, can be such a great skill building opportunity. So you want to plug your book real quick? You've got a book coming out?
Yeah, we'd love to.
Go
We'd
ahead.
love to chat about that. Yeah, we have a book coming out October 14th. It's available for pre-order right now. It's called Living Room Leadership. And so if you're interested in learning not just about more about the positive impact you can have in your family, about how to connect, how to build a culture of vision, growth, and connection, how to become great leaders by leading through the lens of your family, and how to create them as well and raise the great leaders. So that's called Living Room Leadership. Again, it's available at livingroomleadershipbook.com. I realize that's a really long URL, but yes, livingroomleadershipbook.com. And I'm most active on LinkedIn as well. I post a lot of content on there. So that's at Ranala Families, as well as Instagram is at Ranala Families as well.
Great. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Good luck with your book launch.
Thank you. Yes, I wrote it with my husband, so I want to give him credit too.
Awesome.
So we co-wrote it
Good
together.
Partnership.
Because we do this work together and love it. So yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you, Brittany, for this conversation. I can't believe our time flew so quickly. It was so fascinating to talk with you. I'm really thankful for the work that you're doing to support families to build vision and purpose in their homes, and for the insight that you lent today to conversations about mental health and tweens and teens and the saturation of tech that we live in every day. So thank you so much.